Hello, everybody. I'm Pastor Dave Lewis. I'm the Executive Director at the Western Pennsylvania campus of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. And I'm happy to talk to you today about relapse prevention and response. So, those of you family who are watching, maybe you've have a loved one who you've been through this process over and over and over again. Relapse. And it's one of the very, very frightening, scary things that maybe you're thinking of even now. My son or daughter's doing well. They're in the Adult and Teen Challenge program. But what happens if they relapse? That might be your worst fear right now. When they're in a program and you know they're doing well, you have rest, you relax, your anxiety level is way down, but maybe they're approaching graduation soon and they're going to be coming home, and you're saying to yourself, well, what do I do if they relapse? And that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about the dynamics of relapse, and we also want to talk about what to do, how to respond. So that's what we're going to look at today. So first thing I want to say is I want to answer a simple question. Does the fact that somebody relapses, does that mean that everything is a failure, everything is lost, that the treatment episode has failed? And that's just not the case. Let me read this quote. No, it does not mean that treatment has failed. The chronic nature of addiction means that relapsing to drug use is not only possible but also likely. Relapse rates are similar to those for other well-characterized chronic medical illnesses such as diabetes, hypertension, and asthma, which also have both physiological and behavioral components. Treatment of chronic diseases involves changing deeply embedded behaviors. For the addicted patient, lapses back to drug use indicate that treatment needs to be reinstated or adjusted, or that alternate treatment is needed. So there is relapse in this disease of addiction, and we need to understand that and prepare for it. And it doesn't mean it's a failure. As a matter of fact, some of the key people that work for me at my facility outside of Pittsburgh came through what's called the restoration program. And the restoration program is available for those who've graduated from our long-term program. And if they relapse, they can come back for 90 days. And I've seen those men really flourish because of the relapse, because the relapse actually showed them, and as it said in the quote, deeply embedded behaviors that they never looked at. And that's what we're going to look at. So we're going to learn in this training 4 deeply embedded behaviors that lead to relapse. So you as a family member need to understand what's going on and what characterizes a relapse and what deeper issues are going on that cause relapse in the men and women who come through here and end up falling back into the drug use and alcohol use. And then we're going to learn what role do you play as a family, your church, your community, to help individuals not relapse and stay healthy in their recovery, and also what can you do to keep them on the right path if they end up relapsing. Okay? So let me just go over the 4 motivations, and then we'll go over them one by one. So the 4 deeply embedded behaviors that contribute to relapse can be summarized this way. Number 1 is insufficient motivations to stay in sobriety. Number 2 is focusing only on obvious and outward behaviors to the neglect of inward, deeper behavior change that's needed. Number 3 is not asking for help before somebody relapses. And number 4 is excessive compulsive behaviors that people use to deal with problems that they're going through. So we'll go through these one at a time. So by the end of this training, I want you to at least have a sense of these 4 different topics. So behavior 1 is insufficient motivation to stay in sobriety. So having correct motivation to stay away from drugs and alcohol is very key and core of the issue of someone who's battling substance use disorder. It is like the fuel of a car. I have to ask myself this question: why am I staying away from drugs and alcohol today? So just a little bit about myself. I'm a graduate of the Teen Challenge program from 2001. I was 19 years old when I came through the program, addicted to drugs and alcohol, and I've been free for 19 years of it. But I still have to ask myself every single day, why am I staying away from drugs and alcohol? Like, what is the motivation? Why am I doing it? So it's like the fuel of a car. Many times we are motivated to stay sober by things that won't put enough fuel in the tank. So I want you to think about that analogy. A car, you can have a great sports car, some souped up car that looks really nice, but it's not going to go anywhere if the gas tank is empty. So we can have a great program here. We can have all the bells and whistles. We can have a great staff. We can have a great program, system, education, everything. But the individual has to be motivated to say no to drugs and alcohol, okay? So many individuals can make it through the entire 12-month program with us here by motivating themselves with things that in the end, listen, things that in the end will not provide enough fuel to say no when the urge to use comes. And notice I said that, okay? There are some individuals whose story is that just one day their desire to use drugs and alcohol was taken away from them and it never came back. That is not the case for about 90% of the men, including myself in my recovery. I wasn't just taken away from the desire to use drugs and alcohol. I can still, on my best days, even 19 years later, have the thought, you know what, it'd be nice to have a drink. Oh, you know what, it would be nice to smoke some marijuana. That thought can hit me. So it's a normal struggle for your loved one to have. Okay, so please understand that. It's normal for guys and girls like us in addiction to have urges and cravings. Okay, so the issue is, are these motivations that initially get somebody to come into a treatment center and get off drugs and alcohol, are those motivations enough in the long run to keep them away from drugs and alcohol? So let's go over some of the insufficient motivations that individuals cling to early on to say to them, explain to themselves why they're not using drugs and alcohol at that moment. A relationship with a significant other or a child. So many times individuals, and this is a good thing, they get pushed into drug and alcohol treatment through the pressure of a mother, a father, a spouse, their children, just a family situation. So they enter into our program. And 99% of the reason they are there is to please or satisfy their wife, their mother, their father, because they're afraid of being homeless. Their wife threatened to divorce them or say they can't see their kids again. And, you know, they're in. Now, maybe some of you watching this, that's what you had to do. And you had to do one of the hardest things. Maybe you had to kick your loved one out of the house. Maybe you had to apply some pressure, call the police on them, get them arrested. And those things push us. That's my story. I got pushed into Teen Challenge because I got arrested and because my parents put their foot down and said, you have to go get this help or we're not going to help you anymore. Or support you anymore. So that's what happened to me. So those pressures, and here's the key principle of this whole thing. Those pressures, even though they are very useful to get someone in to drug and alcohol treatment, they're not necessarily going to keep them off of drugs and alcohol in the long run, because those type of motivations will wear off, especially if the relationship gets restored. And then it's like, okay, here's the whole question it goes back to. Well, why am I staying off of drugs and alcohol today? I mean, for me, I don't have these problems anymore with my family, so it has to go deeper than that. Another desire, to prove to family and friends that you are normal. So many of the individuals that come through our program, the jail time, the reputation that they've developed in the family of being the family addict, failing at jobs, having nothing, to their name, except the clothes on their back and the things they bring into our program. As time goes on, we really want to prove ourselves to our family. We really want to go be successful. So we say to ourselves, well, the reason I'm not going to do drugs and alcohol anymore is because I need to go get a job. I need to go make money, buy a new car, and show my parents that I really am not this horrible drug addict. And believe it or not, that motivation is very, very strong, and it can cause someone to go in a very, very bad direction. The desire to prove themselves to their family. So that's why you as a family member, you really have to communicate a message to your loved one and say, listen, we're just so happy that you're alive. We're just so happy that you're doing well in this drug treatment center. You don't have to prove anything to us. We love you no matter what. We love you, we care about you, and we're going to support you. You don't have to prove to us that you're somehow fixed. That's a big deal for a lot of guys. We want to prove it to ourselves, prove it to our family. Another one of an insufficient motivation, desire for money, job, vehicle, cell phone, i.e. materialism. So many times we might say to ourselves, well, the reason I'm not doing drugs and alcohol right now is because I have this really good job and it pays $20 an hour. And actually, as I go over this motive, many family members, you will say to me, if I ask you the question, has your loved one gotten off of drugs and alcohol before and got an awesome job and bought a brand new truck and had a gorgeous girlfriend or boyfriend and everything was going great and they had every material thing they can need, but yet they still chose to go back and use heroin? Many of you watching will say, yeah, that happened. So that'll tell you right there. These materialistic motivations of a job, money, vehicle, it isn't enough. It is not enough to keep someone away from drugs and alcohol. And you as a family member who's never experienced addiction might look at the situation and go, why would they flush all that down the toilet? Well, that's the nature of this beast called substance use disorder. The other one is legal consequences. So this is another motivation why individuals will get off of drugs temporarily, is because they don't want to go to jail. Avoid jail, violating probation, failing urine screens. So many times individuals will not go back to drugs and alcohol because we're afraid of going to jail again. Well, of course, that's not a sufficient motivation. It doesn't go deep enough because eventually you'll get off probation. Eventually the judge will give you some kind of plea bargain. You don't have to go to jail. And then what? See, this is the whole thing. Then what? So the individual who's on probation and they're not getting high right now because they don't want to fail a urine and go back to jail, what happens when their probation is over? And their main motivation to stay off of drugs was to not go back to jail. Well, now that is off the table, isn't it? That motivation isn't an issue anymore. And many times that's where the deeper issue of, well, this person just needs to look at the deeper issues of why they abuse and use drugs and alcohol in the first place. Family consequences. Being kicked out of the home, losing relationships, many times that's one of the things that motivates us to initially get off of the drugs and alcohol at first, but that's not going to be enough. And then not wanting to suffer the painful consequences of addiction ever again. So many times if I ask a guy, why would you not do drugs again? They'll say, because I don't ever want to go through that pain again. Well, the nature of addiction is that we forget the painful parts and only recall the pleasurable parts. So that's why that doesn't work either. So what is the sufficient motivation? So we here at Adult and Teen Challenge, because we're a faith-centered program, our first answer is going to be a relationship with God in Christ, thankful and grateful for His grace in my life. So to have a relationship with God because He's eternal and He stands above all of these things that I just went over, all of these temporary things, that I can say the reason why every day I choose to not pick up drugs and alcohol, and I do the battle necessary and fight necessary and the honesty and accountability I need in my life, is because of what Christ has done for me. And then contentment and being grateful. Okay, so to remember that I need to stop focusing on all the stuff I don't have and all the stuff I need that's going to make me happy, a girl, a job, a car, money, all this stuff, to stop focusing on that and start focusing more on what I do have. And being thankful and grateful for what I have, that I'm alive today, that I have a place to sleep, that I have food in my stomach, and just be thankful to develop an attitude of gratitude, we call it around here, of being grateful or thankful. That's a deeper reason to do this. Because listen, your loved one is in for the fight of their lives. I know from personal experience, it's not easy to live in our culture that's soaked with alcohol, and now marijuana is becoming acceptable now, and all the stuff that's going on around there. So we got to have a deep work deep down in our heart to say, why am I not doing drugs and alcohol today? And then this is another big thing where I've seen that separates someone who makes it and is successful and has long-term sobriety versus somebody who doesn't. They become other-centered rather than self-centered. So one sure warning sign that you need to look out with your loved one is if they're just super self-centered and are not putting themselves in a situation to volunteer places, to help other people who may have addictions, to work at the church or a community center or wherever. They're pouring themselves out into others. They're becoming other-focused. That's really huge. Like our intern program here is very successful. And if you're not familiar with it, our intern training program is where individuals who graduate can stay on and make a commitment to work here on a volunteer basis and make a stipend and stuff like that. And they help out with the running of the operation here. And that can be a huge breakthrough. It was for me when I was an intern, because I became other-centered. I started to realize there's people in the world who have it way worse than me. There's men that were coming into this program that I can help. And I can actually have much more satisfaction laying my head down on my pillow at night because I've helped individuals than lay down my head on my pillow and think about, oh, I need to make more money, oh, I need to get this, I need to have that, I need to do that. For many times, it's really the danger zone for guys like us. So we have to have that sufficient, deeper motivation than just the outward things. So really talk to your loved one about that. Like, why are you staying away from drugs and alcohol? Like, what is your reasoning? And see what they say. So the second one is focusing only on obvious outward behaviors to the neglect of the inward. Okay? So the next significant behavior that needs to be changed, so we need to consider the motivation of why an individual is choosing to not do drugs and alcohol. Then we need to look at these behaviors that need to be addressed. So there's a tendency among guys like us to think the following: as long as I'm not doing drugs and alcohol, I'm doing great. Okay? We compromise with all kinds of other little behaviors and all kinds of horrible attitudes, but excuse them because we say, at least I'm not using. Now, there's a sense in which it's great that someone who is addicted to heroin, shooting heroin in their veins, ruining their life, overdosing, almost dying, and now they're in our program for 6, 8, 10 months, and they're doing well, they look good, they've gained weight, they're working out. Some of you never knew your loved one was a bodybuilder, did you, until they came here, doing really well. And you've seen life come back to them, and you're like, this is so great. But it's very deceptive. Because even though all those outward things are doing well, we got to look a little deeper at attitudes and different things that don't necessarily, you can't see them on the outside, but they're in there. If anyone's familiar with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a term for this. It's called a dry drunk. So it's called someone who's an alcoholic who stops drinking, but they still have all the nastiness, the anger, the different attitudes that they had when they were drinking are still there. They just don't drink anymore. Jesus himself said, you clean the outside of the cup, but the inside remains filthy. And he was talking to the Pharisees, those individuals in Israel who were really good at their outward religion, but inwardly they had a lot lacking. It's critical for us to continue to work on our inner self in order to continue walking this road of recovery. So you as a family member need to keep an eye out for different behaviors and different things. And I'm going to go over a list of them here real quick of what are some inward behaviors that start to manifest that can put someone in the danger zone of a relapse. So discontentment or entitlement. So this is a big one that we look for here. If someone starts to complain and act entitled and they're like, man, I deserve more, make more money. My boss, he's a blah, 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 and start complaining all the time and start to, act like they deserve more than they actually have and start to complain, that's a big warning sign. So with all these things I'm going to go over, many times these inner attitudes, if they're not put in check, are the fertile soil for a relapse to develop. And many times guys like us, when we let these attitudes fester and manifest themselves, and for you, maybe if you've never been in addiction, it's hard to understand it. But there really can come a point in many individuals that come through our program where they just say, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go get high and drunk. And they just kind of throw in the towel. And many times that attitude didn't just come out of nowhere. It was built up over time as these attitudes were not challenged, either by the person themselves, which obviously is the ideal situation, that I can take in account of myself and challenge my own attitudes. But many times you as a family may have to step in and say, hey, I'm going to challenge you right now because you're acting very entitled right now. You're acting like the world owes you something and they really don't. Boredom. So this is a big one. If you're going to let your son come home and your daughter and you're going to let them stay with you and all they're going to do is play Xbox or PlayStation for 8 hours a day down in the basement, that's a problem. And if they're going to sit around at home and say, I'm bored, and actually, survey says kind of thing, if you ask the number one reason why individuals relapse, this is one of the top ones. They'll say, I was bored. I was sitting around at home, sitting on the couch, didn't have anything to do. I was bored. And then guess what I did? I got on Facebook and checked out if so-and-so was around and messaged him and went out and hung out with him. Well, who's so-and-so? The guy who's still using and getting high. So we got to tackle boredom. So guys like us can't afford to have idle time. We have to have our time filled up with activities, challenges, things that are positive. So boredom is a really big sign. You got to watch out for boredom. If they're saying, well, I'm bored, well, you need to find something to do to keep your time and attention, because idle time's the devil's playground, as they say. Anger or frustration, anger at things and situations, just really walking in anger is a really big warning sign. Learning to control our anger, learning to focus our anger effectively and properly. That's a really big thing that we teach here and that we learn. And guys like myself who have an addiction past really have to work on. I got to make sure my anger is under control and not going out of control. Anxiety and depression. So, mood stuff. Like, I still struggle with anxiety and depression, 18 years later. I don't take medications for it, but many times medications are needed. So watch your loved one, watch their moods. If they're going from depression or having anxiety, tell them they need to get counseling for that. Maybe they need to be on certain medications to help level that out. But anxiety and depression are very, very serious things that need to be addressed, because it's called self-medicating. And many of us got involved and got addicted to drugs and alcohol because those substances have a powerful way of reducing anxiety or lifting up out of depression. So if anxiety and depression is going on, that needs to be dealt with. You need to look out for that. Judgmental attitude or being gossipy. That's one we look for a lot. If someone's always gossiping about other people and being judgmental toward people, I can't stand that person, I don't like that person. That behavior needs to be challenged. That's an issue that needs to be looked at. Unforgiveness and bitterness. Somebody who's just bitter all the time and what is unwilling to forgive, that's a really serious problem that can lead to a relapse, because that unforgiveness and bitterness can be the fertile soil that will lead somebody back to a relapse. Rejection or inability to connect. So someone who isolates a lot, that's a big warning sign. If your loved one starts to isolate, doesn't want to hang out with people, doesn't want to spend time with the family, they need to be challenged on that. They need to understand that social connectiveness is a really big thing that promotes sobriety and promotes someone staying sober in the long run, versus someone who's isolated from social connections tends to struggle staying away from drugs and alcohol. And just pure old selfishness. Like I said before, is the person becoming other-centered, or are they remaining self-centered? Because other-centeredness is a very big thing that'll keep someone away from drugs and alcohol. So that's the second behavior. So behavior one was consider the motivations. So someone has to continually ask themselves the question, why am I staying off of drugs and alcohol today? Number two is looking at the inward instead of the outward. Okay. So behavior three. Now this is one of my pet ones here. Behavior three is not asking for help before the relapse. Before the relapse happens. Okay. So I've worked with easily over 200 graduates who've relapsed. We have a restoration program at our Pittsburgh facility, and it's a resource for you as a family member. If your loved one graduates from our program and falls back into a relapse, they can come to our facility in Pittsburgh for 90 days and get back on their feet. It's a very successful program. It really has helped a lot of men. I've worked with over 200 of them, and not one of them has answered this following question with a yes, not one. So here's how the conversation goes. I'll ask the individual, after they've relapsed and after they find their way back to our program, I'll say, so let me ask you this question. How long was it between the time that you first started having a serious desire, an urge to use again, to drink or do drugs, and you actually gave into that desire? Okay? So, they'll say, a few days or a few weeks. So here's the point. There's always a window of time between, someone's sitting there at home, they're like, I'd really like to smoke some pot, or I'd really like to drink, or I'd really like to do some pills. There's the urge starts to hit them. But they don't give into it right away. Maybe they're fighting it, maybe they're battling it. Okay? Well, here's my next question. Okay, so there was a window of time, a week, a month, a couple days, where you had an urge, but you hadn't given into it yet, and you were struggling. I'll say, during that time, here's the next question. Did you tell anybody about that urge? Okay? Before you gave into it, I've never had one person say yes to that question. Literally, never one. It's always, no, I never told anybody. This is huge. I cannot undersell or underemphasize this idea. This is a very simple and practical step to take, but it really almost makes your loved one relapse proof. If you can say, listen, I'm really struggling with wanting to use heroin right now. I'm having an urge. Can you please help me? If your loved one is able to say that to a trusted pastor, friend, they go to a support group and they can disclose that, you know how much power that has in taking the urge away, or at least putting it out in the light so it can be dealt with? But you know how many of us just don't even ask for help? Now, here's what I want to go over briefly. Why? Why don't we ask for help? Well, first of all, we don't want to ruin our opportunity to use. We know that deep down, if we confess our desire to use, this will cut off our opportunity to use and in the future. This is called having reservations, okay? So the person's like, you know what, I still, back of my mind, would like to get high or drunk, and I don't want to ruin my opportunity. And what we teach the men here and the women here is sometimes that's the radical steps you have to take to stay clean and sober. You have to ruin your own opportunities to use. You have to just take that step no matter what. Even if there's 2% of you that wants to do this and 99% of you wants to go get high, that 1% has to say, you know what, I'm going to go tell somebody. Okay? The other reason we don't is we have been taught incorrectly that a Christian should be, quote unquote, delivered from the desire to use. So we don't take the urge seriously when it comes or attribute it to some outside source. So many times we're ashamed to tell that we're having an urge to use because we have this idea that in Christianity, people who are Christians are perfect now and they don't have any struggles. And I do my best as a pastor to teach our guys at the Pittsburgh Center. That's not the case. Okay? Even if you're a Christian, you're going to still have the same struggles as everybody else, and it's normal to have urges to want to use because that's your sin of choice. That's your drug of choice. That's your alcohol. That's the thing that you've done for so many years. Of course, you're going to still have urges in that direction. Many times we're crippled by guilt and shame for having the urge and don't confess it. So, tip for families, if you're going to have your loved one with you, you have to create a context. Have that conversation with them. You need to sit down at the dining room table with your loved one and say, listen, you can come to me and talk to me if you're having struggles with wanting to use. And I will talk to you about it. I won't judge you for it. I won't penalize you for it. I won't freak out about it. Because many times we're afraid of what your reaction is going to be if we actually got honest. If I actually got honest with you and said, listen, I'm really struggling with wanting to get high today, that you would go, what? I can't believe it. You went through a year-long program. How could you still want to get high? And we're afraid of that reaction. So you as a family member need to just watch your own reactions and maybe you got your own work to work on as far as your perception of what addiction is and what the struggles of it are. And then sometimes we're just not in an environment that promotes and produces openness and honesty. So the environments we put ourselves in, it's very important. That's why NA and AA groups are so effective, is because these groups promote openness and honesty. And like if you go to an NA or AA meeting, it's safe and perfectly normal and perfectly okay to say to the group, I'm struggling today. And people in the group will embrace you. Okay? So that's what we need. We need that place. So those who have achieved long-term recovery do the following. Okay, now we're still on topic 3, is confess the desire to use before. They are plugged into a group or community or an individual where they can freely talk about their struggles to use without fear of retaliation or shame. That is across the board something individuals are doing, and they will tell you that they have done, that have achieved long-term recovery from drugs and alcohol. They have either a group or an individual that they can talk freely without fear of retaliation or shame. And then the question has to be asked, is a family member always the best person? No. Because maybe you as a family member have been so hurt and harmed by your loved one's choice to use, it will trigger something in you if you're the one they confess it to. If you're a spouse, a lot of times that you're the last person you need to talk to about it early on, because that's going to trigger you and freak you out. So you have to push them to say, listen, I can't be the one because I'm still struggling. It's okay to be honest with us like that. Like, listen, I'm going to be struggling. If you were the one who came to me and said, I'm struggling with wanting to use heroin, that would freak me out. But please find someone. Go to the pastor. Go to your brother. Go to your uncle. Go to a friend. Go to, find somebody. They have to have that person in their life that they can talk to openly and freely and not hide things from. And then here's another thing. When they are tempted to use substances, they call someone, go to a meeting, go to church group, etc. I mean, that's huge. Please push this on your loved one. Implore your loved one. Grab them by the shoulders and shake them until they understand this. You need to talk to someone if you're having an urge to use drugs or alcohol before you actually give in to the urge to use. You need to talk through that. Don't hide it. Don't pretend it's not there. Don't just fight it on your own. You need to talk to somebody. That's so big. I can't oversell it, like I said. And they actively help others who are struggling with addiction by contributing to a support group or church. So that's another big thing I've seen with men and women who are making it in recovery and have 5, 10, 20 years clean and sober, is they're contributing, they're giving back. They put themselves in a servant relationship somewhere where they're giving back and pouring into other people. So then finally, behavior 4. So what are our behaviors so far? We're wrapping up now. This is our final point. Behavior 1 is the motivation. So we got to consider and have the proper motivations to stay away from drugs and alcohol and understand that certain motivations just aren't going to be enough. Number 2 is you got to deal with the inner attitudes instead of just looking at the outside of the person. The inner attitudes need to be challenged and changed. Number 3, confess, ask for help before you give in to an urge to use drugs and alcohol, not after. And then finally, 4th, excessive compulsive behavior to deal with problems or stress. So just a core issue about what addiction is. There's a lack of self-control over bodily impulses in general, because addiction is very bodily. You put a chemical into your bloodstream and it affects the way you feel and it affects it instantly. Well, these compulsive behaviors, they're called. We need to look at them. In my experience, almost all relapses begin with dabbling in the following areas. Every restoration student I've worked with, without exception, found their way back to their drug of choice through dabbling with what we call the unholy trinity of relapse. And if you look at the graphic here, the unholy trinity of relapse. So this is what we call it. These are the 3 areas consistently. I mean, there's really no exceptions to this. Consistently, these are the things that guys and girls start dabbling in before they go into a full-blown relapse. So sexual sin or romantic relationships, alcohol, and quote-unquote legal mood-altering substances. And you'll see the list there. That's what we call the unholy trinity of relapse. So here's what happens. An individual, let's say they're a heroin addict. They say to themselves, well, I can have a few beers, smoke a few cigarettes, and fornicate with a girl, and that won't lead me back to my drug of choice. I'll be fine. But here's what's really going on. All those behaviors I just listed are stimulating that part of us that say, this makes me feel good. Oh, this little glass of beer makes me feel good. Oh, having sex out of wedlock and having fornication and sexual problems, that makes me feel good. And smoking the cigarette makes me feel good. But look what those activities are doing. For guys like us, it's stimulating that part of our brain and that part of our soul that enjoys, that feels so good. Oh, that feels so good. You know what else feels so good? Heroin. So these things are greasing the skids for us to fall back into a full-blown relapse because we're dabbling with this. So compulsive behaviors are very, very big. And if you look at the graphic here, I mean, we're running out of time, so really study this because this is from a guy named Gorski. And he is a very good counselor on addiction. And he talks about the ESCAPE acronym. So these are the things, this is the problem. We escape our problems through compulsive behaviors, okay? So we evade is the E in escape. So instead of dealing with the problem head on, like I say, we're having a problem at work, problem in our relationship, money problems, just stress, anxiety, fear, whatever. We're having problems, right? Life is full of problems. Well, we don't deal with the problem directly. And you know what happens when you don't deal with problems directly? That's where stress comes from. So I'm stressed a lot of times because there's a problem I know I need to face, I know I need to handle, but I avoid it. Well, that causes me to be stressed out about it. Well, guess what helps to relieve stress? Compulsive behaviors. Now, this is the difference between a compulsive behavior and just any old behavior. A compulsive behavior is something I do with the express purpose of escaping reality and relieving stress that's caused by my unresolved problems. So, for example, playing, a little bit of video games for 30 minutes to an hour to just, have some fun, that's fine. But playing video games for 6 hours a day, sitting on my Xbox playing Call of Duty or whatever, that's a major problem, especially if I'm doing that to avoid my responsibilities and avoid reality, okay? So we go to the compulsive behavior. It's an unhealthy way to relieve the stress. And then what do? Now, many times when guys like us are doing compulsive behaviors, we tend to isolate because we're ashamed. So it isolates us from relationships because we're doing all these behaviors in secret that if people knew what we were really doing, we'd be ashamed, so we avoid those people. Okay? And then what's avoiding people do? Causes new problems. And then it causes new problems, which causes new stress, and then the cycle starts all over again with the E and the escape, and then we evade again. And as this cycle revs up, it reaches a breaking point where the stress and anxiety is so much, and the compulsive behaviors we're trying to scrape together, working out, fornicating, doing all this crazy stuff to try to relieve stress, it isn't enough. And then our drug of choice, our heroin, is in the background going, come back to me. I can take all this stress away. And then we fall into it. So with this cycle of problem, stress, compulsive behaviors, more problems, more stress, more compulsive behaviors, when it reaches a critical point, our drug of choice comes calling. So that's why managing our problems and dealing head on with them, which reduces stress, is very key in long-term recovery. Okay? So encourage them to connect with somebody who's going to help them deal with their problems. Many times, men like us, we need a counselor. We need a therapist. We need a pastor. We need a mentor. We need someone who, if I'm stressed out because of this problem, can you guys please talk to you? Can you help me talk me through how to relieve my stress and deal with this problem head on? So that's our training for the day. Let's go over the 4 points, because I want you to walk away from this with something very practical that you can talk to your loved one about as you go on your visit with them. What's their motivation for staying clean? You could ask them the question, hey, tell me why you're staying off of drugs and alcohol today. I just watched this video with this guy, Dave, and it's a very important point. Why are you ultimately going to never do drugs and alcohol again? What's your reasoning? And really, help them dig into that, because it's important. Number 2, and listen, I went on visits with my parents. I've heard the stories, many times when you take them off to go on a visit somewhere, some of these, the second point, inner attitudes and actions might come to the surface while you're in the car ride with them. Challenge them on it. They get angry, entitled, selfish. Oh, go buy me these $150 pair of sneakers, Mom. You're in a teen challenge program. You don't need $150 sneakers. Why? That's crazy. I deserve the money. Whoa. That's an entitled behavior there, son. You need to work on that stuff. Because in that video I just watched, that's going to cause you to relapse eventually. Have these discussions. Learn these things. What's the third one? The third one is talk to them about you need to ask for help when you're having an urge to get high instead of waiting until after you do. That's very important. And then, of course, the fourth is the compulsive behaviors. So listen, if your loved one is asking you to get them a whole bunch of weight supplements and all kinds of things to help them lift weights better, they're not allowed to have them. And you could be feeding into a compulsive behavior of exercise addiction, which is pretty common with guys like us, because that's helping me relieve my stress, but I'm not dealing with my problems directly. It's just relieving my stress. So talk to them about compulsive behaviors. So those 4 things, if you as a family member are familiar with them, it will help you to help your loved one. Okay? And then, bottom line is, if they do relapse, you as a family, especially if you're their resource, you're going to have to step up again and say, listen, this is unacceptable. You need to get yourself back into treatment. Just as if somebody who's a diabetic or someone who has had cancer has a relapse, they need to get back into the hospital. You need to tell them, listen, you need to get back into getting help, get back where you're going to find that help that you need. So I thank you so much for joining me today. Once again, this has been Dave Lewis. I'm the Executive Director at the Western Pennsylvania campus of our Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. We're so happy to have your loved one in our program and be able to help them, and I hope this has helped you. So thanks, and God bless.